History channel and to our Q&A. Part 1, get your weekend started the right way. We are starting off our weekend the right way on this Friday, February 27th, the penultimate day of the month, with our Q&A, where you can ask me anything you would like about history or social studies of any type, background, region, or area. So for the next hour or so, I will be answering your questions about history and social sciences, as we do every Friday and Saturday. Fridays at 6 p.m. Eastern, Saturdays now at 3 p.m. Eastern, and we have our Sunday live stream lecture, which will be completing Russian history, our fourth in the series for live stream lectures on Sunday, this coming Sunday. We will be doing that at 3 p.m. Eastern instead of 4 p.m. Eastern, so an earlier live stream lecture than we are used to. I'll be joined in the background with the very famous Berlin Congress or conference or whatever you want to call it. And so that is when the Europeans decided that they were going to divide up the world, particularly the continent of Africa. And instead of fighting each other in what could have been a world war at the time, they decided to divide up the African countries, allowing certain areas to go to Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Italy, Spain, all of the different powers. The two major European powers that were left out were the Austro-Hungarians and the Russians. This was without any suggestions or input from the Africans themselves, and was based on their entire principles of imperialism, social Darwinism, paternalism, and their desire to build the biggest empire they possibly could. So happy Friday to you, and welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel and to our Q&A, where you can ask me, a historian, anything you'd like about history and social studies. And if you enjoyed what I just discussed, please like and subscribe and become a Friendly Neighborhood Historian. It's as easy as all of that. Follow our social medias, like our Discord, where we have talks, and please follow my moderator Harsonet's channel, where he does edits and shorts on U.S. presidents, which I think are really, really good. And we have tons of long-form and short-form videos about U.S. presidents and leaders all around the world here on the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. So, I don't know about the money from the jewels. I just don't know about it. It's good to see Robotic Duck here. Alex is here too. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. A happy Friday to all of you. So if you have questions about history or social studies, please drop them in the chat. I've watched a couple of your edits. They're fine. They're fun. Edits are a fun, enjoyable way to communicate information and make shorts, you know. It's not exactly what I do, so if you want edits in your shorts, you're going to want to check out Harsonet's channel. And if you just want informational shorts, you're going to want to check out my channel. But please check out both. Lincoln Sherman March to the Sea lasted 37 days, 60 by 255 miles through the heavily populated area, Atlantic Ocean. I know that. A propaganda edit of Bill Clinton, when Bill Clinton is on the Capitol today testifying in his involvement and association with Jeffrey Epstein, is quite interesting. So, anyways, what do we want to talk about? What history, social studies do we want to discuss today? What questions do you have about social sciences, all throughout the world? I'd be happy to answer. And we are in our studio. I'm in my formal attire, as usual, and I hope you are all having a really, really great Friday. A happy weekend to all of you, and we appreciate you choosing to spend it the right way by joining us along our journey of answering and learning about history together. We've been doing these live streams for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, and we've been a channel for just over 2 years. So if you're new, we really welcome you. If you're returning, we're glad to have you back. Consider becoming a member if you haven't already, where you get early access and bonus content. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. The Gaza Strip is 25 by 3.7 to 7.5 miles, bordered by the Mediterranean Sea, Egypt, and Israel. Yeah, I'm aware of what it is. Yes, I'm glad. This is the formal wear on the channel. So either I'm wearing my smoking jacket or I'm looking sharp in my shirt and tie or something like that. I try to be dressed nicely for these because I take history seriously, I take the study of it seriously, and I take any chance I get to discuss with the public historical findings and information very seriously. So that's why I'm dressed like this. I'm not always dressed like this in all my videos, but you get the sharp version of me today. Maybe you'll get me more relaxed in my smoking jacket, which turns me into History Hefner tomorrow, starting at 3 p.m. Eastern when we do the Q&A instead of 6 p.m. Eastern. So we'll be going for about an hour or so. We're about 10 minutes late, so we'll be going for just over an hour. So yeah, other questions about history or social studies? Can you guys hear me okay? I'm worried the mic is too far away. What is the argument with the nukes being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? As a historian, do you see the nukes as proportional force? I see it as justified. Yeah, there's a lot of questions about the use of the atomic weapons at at Japan by the U.S. I think the main reason people have questions about this is you have such a huge use of force at such a critical moment in human history that ended the lives of tens of thousands of people immediately or very soon afterwards and impacted lives of hundreds of thousands more. That obviously carries with it a significant historical weight that had never been seen before. And all of a sudden, the world was introduced to the nuclear age and to the atomic age, and they've never been used since. And a lot of people will say, well, look at how bad America is for using them. But the fact that they were used once, twice really, is kind of proof to me how much human beings have moved in the last 80 years to avoid world war when countries have nuclear weapons like the United States, the Soviet Union, China, Great Britain, France, India, so on and so forth. So just their sheer threat of their usage has avoided and kept people away from large-scale military operations that would be equivalent to another world war. In my opinion, the Fourth World War, probably in your opinion, the Third World War. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we're talking about history and we're talking about the proportional force of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Such a heavy use of force obviously created a lot of moral complexities and issues that has become a historiographical debate and a moral and social one as well. But the real issue, I think, with this whole thing is, at the end of the day, there is nothing, there was no way to guarantee the surrender of the Japanese islands. Even with the uses of the atomic bombs, it would have been extraordinarily difficult to achieve. The Americans hadn't achieved it, and there was a lot of preparation on the Japanese domestic front for dealing with an invasion by the American forces and the Soviet forces, who would have been far more brutal in their exploits in the different parts of Japan had they actually invaded the islands. They had already split the Korean peninsula, and we know exactly what happened because of that. So I think that at the end of the day, it's a morally heavy question, and I think everybody should wrestle with the impact of use of nuclear weapons. But at the same time, the real issue is that the use of them probably ended a war that would have cost many more lives with a U.S. invasion. Many more Japanese lives would have been lost with a U.S. and Soviet-led invasion of the Japanese islands than with anything else. The United States had already been firebombing Japan for months, and people rarely bring attention to that. The firebombing is equivalent to what they did at Dresden, which is considered one of the worst humanitarian mistakes by the Allies during the war. So, let me see here. That's a long answer to a short question, but the question was about the use of the nuclear weapon, and the impact of those at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, let me see here. Yeah, but there's too many emotional arguments, and there's too many idiots who really don't know anything about history and can't think of a proper counterfactual, because they will say we shouldn't have done it, the United States should not have used the weapons on Japan. However, what would have been the alternative? There really isn't a good alternative where everybody is sated and everything went well. So, is reading Aristotle a prerequisite for understanding Augustine and Thomas Aquinas' philosophy? Well, Aristotle and Plato are heavily influential on early Christian thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas and the church fathers and folks like that. They might have been influential on St. Paul, who was a Roman citizen who was definitely educated in the Greco-Roman world and wrote many of the letters of the New Testament in Greek. So I don't think that I don't think it's necessarily a prerequisite, but I'm not a philosopher and I'm not a theologian. But definitely many Christian theologians have been influenced heavily by Thomas Aquinas and by Aristotle. Let me see here. What was the challenges our grandfathers faced after D-Day pushing into France once they established their burn heads? I heard the hedgerows were deadly. Yes, the Germans fought pretty remarkably, and the D-Day is not just one day of battle. It is the beginning of a campaign of invasion, of Norman campaign, where the Allies take back Normandy, and eventually they push all the way back to Paris and liberate Paris with the help of the French resistance in September of 1944. But they wouldn't get out of fighting in France until January of 1945, and it was pretty brutal, to say the least. And the Bulge is definitely the biggest example of the Americans almost being destroyed. Well, I see the argument on the nukes as if what-ifs, like Japan would have surrendered or Japan was already weak, which is just completely untrue. Yeah, there's no basis in logic or evidence that the Japanese were ready to surrender and the Americans just decided to be cruel, or that the Americans decided to just flex their muscles against the Soviets. Anyone who comes up with a secondary cause like that, other than the generally accepted one, and does not qualify it properly, is probably selling you something. Yeah, the Americans wanted to show off to the Soviets, but there was more of an, but that wasn't the only reason. It wasn't just, oh, we're going to show off and kill hundreds of thousands of people. It was, we're going to end this war and we're going to show off. And now you may ask, why were they showing off? Because they knew there was a growing divide between them and the Soviets, especially after FDR died in May of 19, or April of 1945. Where did white people come from? Well, white people are like every derivative, um, every derivative race, a derivative in and of itself of the earliest peoples who migrated and settled in different areas. There's the Arrow Indians, there's Turkic peoples that settle in it. Of course, you have northern barbarians like Gauls and Celts, who eventually become the basis for the northern European peoples. Did America's ruin start in 1913? You're probably basing that on the foundation of the Federal Reserve, but no. America, I don't like the idea that America is ruined or has been ruined. That's not a historically accurate thing. What was the view of the nuke for Patton and MacArthur? MacArthur literally carried out the surrender. They were perfectly fine with its usage and probably would have wanted to use it on the Soviets. MacArthur wanted to use it on the Chinese during the Korean War and was partially reprimanded and removed because of his aggression in that conflict. So they were perfectly okay with the usage of it. And I think everybody, Eisenhower, I think they all knew that this was a necessary feature in order to end the war. It's a relatively modern, conscientious objector, hippie argument that, yeah, using that was bad, when the alternative probably would have been far morally worse. I know that there's big debates within the Catholic Church, for instance, about whether it was morally justified, and that's just absurdity. I mean, you literally have, and I mean, because there had been a Catholic history in the city of Nagasaki, meant that Nagasaki should not have been targeted. I mean, that's not the point. That wasn't the point of using it. Thank you. I really do like this time. Do you think the U.S. should have entered World War I? Well, it's World War II, in my opinion, the Great War. I think that it's interesting to see the U.S. enters the war, and I think that forces the Germans into surrender. It's not that the Americans bail out the British and the French, but it's that the British and the French probably would have been overwhelmed with the Germans knocking the Russians out of the war. We talked about this during my live stream lecture, which we do every Sunday. This one was on the Russian Revolution last week, or the rise of the Bolsheviks. The real truth of the matter is the U.S. entering the war turned the tide. If you think that Europe would have been better had the Kaiser won, and you could actually make that argument, then no, the U.S. should not have entered the war. If the Kaiser had won, there would have probably been no Hitler, no Nazis, no Holocaust, and no Second World War, or Third World War, in your opinion, or in my opinion. So it's an interesting what if. But yeah. Imagine if they dropped a nuke on China. Well, they thought about doing it, and Truman said no. And you had 1 million Chinese soldiers willing to fight and push the Americans back down below the 38th parallel in their fight against the North Koreans. From a free individualistic economy to a socialist collectivist plan economy is what the elites want to turn Canada and all Europe into, flood it with migrants, stress over social programs, etc. What you call that, I call cultural conflict. Migration in history has never come without heavy cultural conflict. Look at America in the turn of the 19th century. Look at the Roman Empire in its last couple of centuries. You think an economy based on potentially worthless paper money would be more prudent? The American dollar is potentially worthless. All paper money is potentially worthless. They came from the Caucasus Mountains, but from other regions as well. If I gave you a gift, can you rant for a good 2 minutes on the American progressive population regulation by Teddy Roosevelt and Taft on unsafe food practices and tenement issues? Yes. Hey, South African historian, why do we still teach Egyptian history when Egyptians never invented anything interesting? And your thoughts, excuse my English second language. Well, I'm glad if you're joining us from South Africa, we're really glad that you're here. The Egyptians invented the pyramids. The Egyptians invented the basis for how we do astronomy. The Egyptians developed the first heavily civilized or heavily united civilization, one king over all the area, one land, utilizing the greatness of the Nile to produce a beautiful and eclectic society. Well, yeah, we need the gold standard probably back, or the silver standard, because fiat currency relies only on itself, and that's completely pointless. And there are pyramids all over the world. So William Howard Taft is actually more of a regulator than Theodore Roosevelt in many ways. Taft focuses more on breaking up monopolies and enforcing the antitrust legislation. Trusts and monopolies are different. Monopolies is when one company controls one area of the one area of production of a particular good or service. A trust is when a series of different organizations control all of the production. So you can have one, imagine if Michelin was the only company allowed to sell tires, but a trust would be that Michelin working with GM and all the others is the only group that sells cars, that only makes all the products for cars. That's a trust. When you have all of the constituent parts of a product or service controlling their field, their independent fields. So antitrust legislation had existed since the end of the 19th century, but had never been heavily enforced by the Americans. It was a relatively new thing that the Americans decided to start enforcing under Theodore Roosevelt, and William Howard Taft did even more of it in his administration, despite heavy criticism from Teddy Roosevelt of not being progressive enough. The progressive movement basically aimed to use government power and action, particularly through the executive branch, to enforce laws and create laws that would necessitate a government intervention in certain areas that would basically create clean working and living conditions for people, especially poor people in urban areas, many of them immigrants, many of them just learning the ropes of being American. The progressive movement did everything it could to acculturate these people to the United States while also prompting legislation and action to enforce antitrust legislation, the regulation of businesses, and making sure that businesses were clean. A huge example of this is Upton Sinclair's expose of the jungle, which basically described how horrible the meatpacking industry was in Chicago at the time. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 basically allowed for the regulation of those industries, whereby there were certain limits put on how much deleterious materials, toxins, and things like that could be used, and basically forced sanitation and workplace safety requirements for these areas. These all went hand in hand with other enforcements of workplace safety ordinances by the Roosevelt and Taft administration. So, what about the pyramids in South America? Do they think they're related? No, but you can relate them to the ziggurats and the pyramids of different areas because they all serve the purpose of worship, of honoring the dead, of worshiping the gods, of ascending higher and above where the gods are. Yeah, they had human body parts, people falling in, accidents in the workplace. They needed these regulations. Let me see. More. Let's go on. Do you think Genghis Khan was European? He had red hair and green eyes, but depicted as Asian. He was Asian. I mean, mass, uncontrolled immigration is not a cultural society problem in this day and age. It's a corruption problem. Importing low-wage, no-skill workers is something politicians open the doors to. I'm not going to talk about politics. If you want me to analyze something politically but use a historical perspective, you can give me a super chat. I'm not going to talk about politics, geopolitics, or religion today outside of discussing historical importances. And if you want me to actually give an analysis on it from a historical perspective, give me a super chat. It helps the channel out. All the money that you give to this channel goes back into the channel. I'm not in the mood for talking about politics because people want to commandeer the channel all the time, and I'm getting tired of it. Do you think Obama should become Supreme Counselor of the High Council? What did I just say? What's your religion? What did I just say again? I don't share my religious perspectives. I don't share my political perspectives. My job is to communicate the truth. The job of a historian is to tell the truth. And I have to tell the truth to you no matter what I think about the issues. And so I used to do, I haven't done it in a while, I probably should start doing it again, daily news reports about things going around the world, because I felt that who better to tell the truth than a historian, because it's literally my job. And I don't like the way the news reports things because it's not news, it's spin. So religion and history goes hand in hand. Well, they do, but my religious beliefs are not pertinent to what I think about historical things. Nor are they pertinent for understanding it. Yes, you can't study culture. You can't study the development of civilizations without studying their religion. Religion has a binding effect on all civilizations, no matter where you are in history. It's part of creating a common culture that everybody shares. I don't know who the Supreme Counselor is. Not sure the truth of it, but my friend told me Japan had indigenous migrations in waves, and some of the early waves were more Northwest Asian, Caucasus, white Asians. I don't know. All I know is Japan hasn't done much migration throughout much of its history. So Japan having migration has to be early on, before the Heian period. For those just joining us, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. This is my weekend Q&A, part 1. We do 2 of these, one on Friday and one on Saturday, and our live stream lecture on Sundays. So with Star Wars in the past, it says a long time ago, if we were to take it, but obviously at that point, far in a galaxy far, far away, space and time are so bent out of proportion that they really don't matter anymore. Anyways, other questions about history and social studies. I hope you're enjoying this. This is where we do history in a friendly, neighborly manner, 24/7, 365, or 366 days a year. And we also, of course, have short and long-form content always available. Compare 2024 Netanyahu, 25 by 3.7 to 7.5 miles. Lincoln Sherman's March to the sea. 60 by 285 miles. I really don't care. Obviously, it's a much larger area, the eastern coast of Georgia. One of the reasons I think the Israel-Gaza thing is blown over proportion, of course, the suffering of people in Gaza is not blown out of proportion, although it kind of is sometimes. That's another issue, and again, I don't want to talk about the politics of this. But my whole point is that you're dealing with an area of land that is so infinitesimally small, it is almost impossible to wage war there the way you would in an open plain country like Germany or even Japan or Russia. Thank you for joining us, Ricky. You're one of my favorite people here. So, history about mermaids, Bigfoot, aliens. We have these historical ideas of these mythological creatures existing from all of human history in almost all corners of the world, where these beings have power unlike any other being, and they are some sort of hybrid shapeshifter connected to the divine star creatures who visit us. I mean, that's what the Anunnaki are in ancient Assyrian. I talk about this stuff all the time. I found when looking for the Nephilim in the Bible, I found when looking for the longest speech in history, all sources direct me to Cory Booker's Senate speech. Do you know any longer documented speeches in history? That's the longest from the Senate floor. I can't think of any others that are long. Well, you're very welcome, Ricky. Anyways, other questions about history or social studies? I mean, before him, Strom Thurmond had the longest filibuster, but filibustering is just speaking on endlessly in order to communicate your point and just win political points and score a victory for your side while stonewalling the other side. I think it's a ridiculous notion. Do you think the Nile or the Rhine has seen more iconic battles? Ooh, that's a great question. When I think about how many times Egypt has been invaded, I think the Nile, but it's more documented. There are probably ancient battles being fought on the Rhine by different barbarian Germanic groups. You have the Teutoni, the Alemanni, the Gauls, the Celts, long before the Romans ever got there and could document it. Is your whole channel about bringing up historical facts and theories as a way that's friendly enough for kids, hence friendly history? I mean, I went friendly history based off of Spider-Man, because he's my favorite superhero, but friendly in the sense that I don't get angry. I try not to get angry. I try to communicate history in a thoughtful, meaningful, educational way that is family friendly. I don't curse on the channel. I don't use profanity. I can get hot under the collar, but my job is to educate people. So I try to be friendly about it, and I try to find the good things in history. I try to find things that we like and we can enjoy and look at the good moments and not just the bad. So JJ, that is why it's called friendly history. Why was the USSR unsuccessful in maintaining superpower status? The US outbid them in the 1980s. You'll have to come to my live stream lecture on Sunday to learn more about that, because I will be discussing this issue because I've been going on Russian history there for a while. We couldn't get through all of it last week, so we're going to be doing another live stream lecture this Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern, not 4 p.m. Eastern as usual. So please join us there. Thank you for the free advertising. Remember when Democrats filibustered the 1980s Civil Rights Bill? There was no what civil rights bill in the 1980s? You mean the 1964 civil rights bill? Cory Booker's speech was over 24 hours. Yes, he was. Yes, it was. I would have to guess there are longer religiously inspired speeches in history, but can't find concrete information about a specific speech. Yeah, I guess so. 10th Amendment. The power is not delegated to the United States, but the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Yeah, I'm aware of this. I've read this. Was the Middle East part of Africa at one point? No, unless you are counting the supercontinent. The U.S. Constitution does not explicitly contain a clause prohibiting states from leaving the Union. The whole point of the United States, the whole point of the Constitution, was to create unity in the face of ultimate political instability of the Articles of Confederation. The Constitutional Convention was called to fix the Articles, and then eventually they decided to trash them and start new by creating a system where all the states were unified in purpose and goal, had the same currency, had the same federal leaders and federal government. The South seceding prevented that from continuing. So it's not so the very nature of a constitution, the very nature of a supremacy clause in Article 5, the very nature of the three branches of government, of federalism, the very nature of the creation of that system is anti-secessionist. So secessionism makes no sense. Have you ever assisted at any archaeological digging site or anything like that? No, but I probably should. And I do like this shirt a lot. Hicks said, great to see you. I'm learning about Muammar Gaddafi. Overall bad, right? I'm getting confused on the info I'm gathering about him. There's a lot of rehabilitation efforts of people like Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein because of how chaotic and messed up the Middle East has been. But just because one thing is horrible doesn't mean that the other thing wasn't bad. Gaddafi is probably a more preferable situation for many Libyans than their society today, but Gaddafi was a bad guy. Make no mistake, this is a depraved, despotic individual who terrorized his own people to retain power, and the same for Saddam Hussein. Thank you, GK. I really appreciate that. You are so kind. Well, he was effective. He was a good leader. He was strong, but he was a sponsor, had been a sponsor and producer of terrorism, and of course terrorized his own people. That's why they couldn't wait to kill him after they did all sorts of other stuff to him. I'm doing well, Joe. I hope you are doing well too. I appreciate being called professor. It's good to see you. Yeah, well, I mean, the U.S. government has teamed up with dictators and despots many times throughout history and then turned on them. Mao Zedong was one of the partners of the U.S. during the last World War, what you call World War II, what I believe is World War III, because he was against the Japanese. And then after the war, they turned on him to try to fund the nationalists, the Kuomintang, and that went nowhere. They were defeated and sent to Taiwan. And in 1949, Mao was the enemy because he was part of the People's Republic of China and he was a communist. Many cultures across the world have paintings, drawings, dragons, maybe closer to bird and reptiles, but hey, I mean, it's all derivative, I think, of the idea of ancient legends of different creatures, and you imagine you take some sort of lizard bird, you combine them and make it extremely powerful. That's no different than shapeshifters, minotaurs, and centaurs, and things like that. But what happened to Gaddafi is technically a war crime, right? Yes, probably. They killed Gaddafi because he was planning on introducing a single African currency and a central bank for the development of the continent. I don't think Gaddafi was going to do that. I don't think it would have ever gotten off the ground. The Arab Spring was a liberal democratic movement. It was neoliberalism in the Middle East and Africa where it really has never been tried and never worked, and still hasn't worked. The Middle East should try to abandon their tribal mentality or things will never change there. Well, I mean, that's overly simplistic. I think you have religious extremism creating huge chaos. You have religious extremism in Islam, in Sunni and Shiites. Look at Iran, which is close enough to the Middle East, and Saudi Arabia, which is in the Middle East, the heart of the Middle East, and you have huge problems. Then you have Israel and the ultra-right in Israel basically falling in love with their own form of nationalism and expansionism in the greater Israel scheme, and that's not going to help anyone. I'm honestly curious as to how hard it might have been for black people in the late 1970s to early 2010s to get a job without straightening their hair and having a buzz cut. I don't know if people were always getting jobs because of that. There is definitely a sense of ideas throughout history. This goes along with redlining and things like this, that African Americans struggled to get their jobs because of their names, their identities, and their fashion sense, if you will, especially with their hair. Where have you been, my brother? Well, I've been here in the Friendly Neighborhood History Studio, producing great content, short and long-form content here and on TikTok for all of you, so please follow me on TikTok. No, Herbert, I can't do that, but you're okay, stupid tomato. So, anyways. So, other questions about history and social studies. We're about halfway through our usual Q&A. We do these every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern and Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern now. Well, I don't think it's just Islam. Islam hasn't always caused problems. You have the Islamic Golden Age, you have the Abbasid Caliphate, you have the fact that Islam is extremely defanged in places like Malaysia and India, for the most part, and in Malaysia, and Indonesia. Yeah, those areas. So institutions that are responsible for prosecuting war crimes is basically okay with Gaddafi's death. I mean, the discontinuity in international law and international organizations enforcing those international laws, the inconsistency is quite absurd. International law does not exist without the West, particularly the United States in the last 80 years. The League of Nations was a disaster. The United Nations has only survived probably because of the U.S. I'm not a nationalist. I'm not, waving the American banner. I'm just saying what pretty much is brass tacks facts. I appreciate you subscribing because I recognize something from Family Guy, but this is a history channel, Stupid Tomato, so if you have a question or something you want to talk about, or if you just want to listen, I would be happy for that. He was tortured, he was abused, all sorts of things happened that I can't say on YouTube, and then he was killed. And they recorded it. They humiliated the man. Which, I mean, he deserves humiliation for some of the things he did. Does he deserve to die like that, like a dog, which is like worse than a dog? Probably not. This is the same criticism that I get. I get the same criticism for saying the Shah of Iran, Gaddafi, and Saddam should have never gone anywhere. Never. It was a bad idea. And it was all caused by the United States, by the way. So for the glazing I just did about the United Nations and the United States being the ones to enforce international law, I just took something away. Yes, friendly history giveth and friendly history taketh away. Between 1800 and 1815, New England Federalists considered separating from the U.S. to form a Northern Confederacy. I don't care. People have been secessionists for a long time in American history, Steve. That doesn't mean that it was okay to do. And they ultimately didn't do it. So, anyways. So yeah, I can glaze American history and talk about how America is the preserver and creator of international law. And without it, the UN would have nothing. And I can also say the U.S. is the reason the Middle East is messed up in many ways. I found him hiding in a sewer and stabbed a bayonet up a no-no spot. He had a bad end, but wasn't exactly a good guy. Exactly. I mean, if you have a question about religion that's related to history, I'll be happy to answer. She is wise. But if you don't, if you want me to analyze a religious doctrine or idea from a historical perspective, I can give me a super chat. Because I have several different historical opinions on religious topics that are not popular and have gotten me basically threatened for people to do all sorts of horrible things to my mother, shall we say. And you can figure out which religion is doing it pretty easily because it's the only religion that does that. I'm sorry. Hindus do not come... I don't say, there's no evidence that the Rig Vedas were written by the Indo-Aryans, or Hinduism may be the world's oldest religion, but it created the corrupt caste system, the Varna system, which has led to suffering for more people than any other religion has. I don't get Hindus saying, and I respect the Varna system, and Hars, you can put the video up on the Varna system if you want to learn. She is wise. If you want to learn about religion. But there's only one but Hindus don't come on and say, I'm going to do this to your family because you are ignorant. No, it's not Christians either. Guess again. It's not Christians. Christians do not do that. I've criticized aspects of the Christian and biblical account from a historical perspective, saying I don't see this happening in history. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying I don't see the evidence for it. And I get Christians who say, well, I disagree. I don't share my religious perspective. I share my historical one. And when I share my historical perspective, I get in trouble because I'm willing to dare to say the truth. The truth of the matter is simple. And if you love the truth, you have to admit certain things. Like I can draw a picture of Jesus doing God knows what, and nobody will get offended. Well, some people will get offended. And then I can't do that for the Prophet Muhammad because I will be killed. That's wrong. That's a double standard. The Prophet Muhammad is not any more special than Jesus. In fact, from every historical account, the Prophet Muhammad is not nearly as impactful or important historically as Jesus. He's up there. But I did a video where I said that Jesus is the most important historical figure who has ever lived. And I don't think that's hard to argue. That's not easy to argue with. And I think Muhammad might be top 10, maybe top 5. But I'm sorry, it's a different tier. That's not an insult to Muhammad. But I can make whatever drawing picture of Jesus I want, and some, Facebook moms will get mad. Oh my gosh, you're insulting our Lord and Savior or whatever. But I can't do that about Muhammad because guess what will happen to me? Charlie Hebdo. So. Mahdi and Jesus are coming soon. Everything will change. We will have free energy when they come in peace. Well, maybe. I don't know. I haven't said I'm not Muslim. I respect Islam. Let me see here. I'm getting way off track. So let's go through other stuff. Gaddafi is a perplexing historical figure, much more interesting than pseudo-elite figure like, say, Che Guevara. But nobody puts Gaddafi on a T-shirt and wears him to union rallies, which I find to be absurd when I see people of color and gay people wearing Che Guevara shirts, knowing full well that Guevara was a racist and a homophobe who killed gay and black people. Excuse me. Woodrow, friendly history. Would you read my essay on Woodrow Wilson if I sent it to you? Not only will I read it, I'll put it on the Substack, because we need some traffic there. Can you briefly explain the Kurdish genocide and Fall campaign? I know very little about it. I know very little about it too. The Kurds have always kind of been pushed around that area and have never gotten their own autonomous state. Which, I mean, the Jews were able to get their own, but the Kurds apparently not. Puerto Rico has the right to secede from the Union whenever it wants. The United States has the right to get rid of Puerto Rico whenever it wants. Yeah, that's never happened to an American territory before. The only exception is the Philippines. Aren't Europeans all the same people? Why so much violent divide? They're all related, interconnected, culturally associated, but familiarity breeds contempt, and it's a true historical perspective. Look at East Asia and look at Africa. Enslavement, warfare, it's just, he's near me and he has stuff I need. What the Europeans did different was go everywhere. And they brought that oppressive violence everywhere they went. They also brought the good things of their culture everywhere they went. Let me see. I'm trying in the United States, needs Puerto Rico like blood right now. Okay. Would you read my, I already answered it. Let me see here. Gaddafi was going to give his people free gas and electricity. How can you do that? Email it to me. Che Guevara was a mass murderer. Well, mass might be a little bit of exaggeration, but he was pretty violent. Christians are the most humble and kind. I've met many Christians who are not. And I've met many Christians who are. And many Christians follow this channel, and many non-Christians do. I've said before that I believe in some sort of concept of a theistic God because I think the universe makes more sense with that God. But I haven't said which religion I am. And I've said the channel is very open to skeptics. And I'm skeptical because I'm a historian. I have to be skeptical. In order to tell the truth, you must be skeptical. And he wanted to create an African currency so they killed him because it could mess up the dollar. Yeah. They're not killing Xi Jinping over bricks, so I don't think so. Does Christianity have a main central church like Catholicism and Vatican? It all depends who you ask in Christianity. Protestant Christians will tell you no. Catholics will say yes, the Catholic Church, and Orthodox will say the Orthodox. There are several what are called apostolic churches that claim to be the original. The Protestants more or less do not do that. Some of the more established older Protestant denominations like Lutherans and Anglicans will try, but overwhelmingly Catholics are the ones who say, especially in the West, we are the church that Jesus Christ founded. And Joe, I really appreciate the super chat. Thank you so much. What do you want? Do you want me to talk about something? Most Christians are humble. A lot of them are, and a lot of them are not. And many Muslims are humble and wonderful people. And we have Muslims like Tayyib. I haven't seen him in a while. Who come to this channel? Tayyib. I hope I'm saying his name right. Who come to this channel and are just the most wonderful, kind people. But yeah, I mean, and we have Muslims who have said horrible things to me, almost to the point of death threats. Does Christianity? I already answered that. I think I can read it after the stream. Yes. Well, I don't know how you can do that. I'm just saying what he said. Fair. Can you talk a little bit about Lent, especially in the Middle Ages? So Lent, the idea of Lent is a development of Catholic doctrine about fasting. It's a reapplication. It's going on right now. It's similar to Ramadan, which is also going on right now. Ramadan is fasting during the day and feasting at night. Lent is the giving up of fasting of different things, particularly meat. It's a Catholic, the Orthodox Church kind of practices it, but the Catholics practice it, and it develops in the Middle Ages as a way to fast and abstain. It used to be Catholics would have to fast every Friday from meat, but it was also a way of you would fast Good Friday and Ash Wednesday, and you would give up sexual activity and things like that. Some people would only eat the Eucharist, would only take communion. And there are different traditions that develop within different European cultures to try to handle these sorts of fasts and festivals that would happen. And the way to get ready for a fast on Wednesday is to have a big party on Tuesday night. And because you weren't allowed to eat the fat off of meat during the Middle Ages, you would eat fat on Tuesday, Fat Tuesday or Mardi Gras. So, which is French. So yeah, and that obviously inspires New Orleans, which is a French city developed in the United States. It pays homage. New Orleans, the celebrations of Mardi Gras in New Orleans to this day, the beginnings of Lent pay homage to the Catholic French inspiration and Creole inspiration of the central and southern parts of the United States during the 17th and 18th centuries. Those areas were not controlled by the Angloids, the English and the Americans until later. How did beer change the world? Wow, beer changed the world in so many ways. The Egyptians were brewing beer about 4,000 years ago. Beer was the usual mode of drink. In fact, children drank beer because water wasn't always safe, and you would not get sick from beer because the alcohol would kill the fermentation, and the alcohol would kill whatever you would come into contact with. So beer changed the world because it was the main drinking thing that was clean for a lot of people. I was just hearing that in Germany in the 1500s, they eventually lowered what you could put into beer into hops, barley, and water. So beer has been, the development of beer. You can see cultural conflict and the cultural development, especially in migration in beer. Think about all the American beers, Anheuser-Busch, Coors. These are Germans. Germans love beer, and Germans have become probably the most well known for their development and marketing and production of beer. And German immigrants in the United States create part of their culture and bring their culture with them and celebrate their culture and contribute to American culture by making America a beer-friendly country. Beer is not drank in Europe the same way it is in the United States. It's not drank at the same level in France as it is in the United States. Obviously, France is known for its wine. Why is beer so big in the United States? Irish and German peoples who were known for their brewing of beer migrated to the United States at heavy rates. The guy who formed Guinness dedicated his brewery in Ireland to the Lord for 1,000 years as a good Irish Calvinist. So, a Christian, you know. I can show you how to call out this Shia lie. Just ask, what's Shia lie? Catholic was the first church the Protestants branched off. I mean, it's the more ancient church. You can't say that Protestantism predates Catholicism. It's historically inaccurate to say that. I don't want to get too much more down the religious rabbit hole. The Eucharist is so fascinating, especially from the lens of the Latin Church and Eastern Orthodoxy. I highly suggest anyone here try to attend a Latin Mass if they have one near them. Well, enjoy that. And M. Caffo, one of my moderators and one of my friends in real life, would probably really, really enjoy that. But it's the Catholic Mass is a very, very long celebration. It's a very interesting one, and it's a very ancient one, and it's very, very different than Christianity in America, which has developed a kind of a casual form of worship of God in a different way. By Mustafa Khattab Quran, the book reads you. Mustafa Khattab Quran? You mean the Quran? There's a different Quran? By the way, since you gave a super chat and you mentioned the Quran, I'll indulge you for this sake. The Quran is, from the Arabic word, it means recitation. Although historically you would say Muhammad wrote it, the Mohammedans teach that the Quran was always pre-existent with Allah, God, in heaven, and it was given by Jabriel, the angel, Gabriel, to Muhammad. First given in the cave, and then there are parts that are continually given to him, and this leads to the development of doctrine within the Quran, where later parts of the Quran are considered to be more authoritative than earlier parts of the Quran. You can see theological changes and ideas. This is the traditional story. The historical evidence seems to propose that the Quran is probably written in the late 7th century, maybe the 8th century even. There are fragments of it existing from the middle to late 7th century, which is a pretty good dating when you consider that Muhammad died in 632. But there is no evidence that Muhammad wrote the Quran. There is also no evidence that John wrote the book of John in the Bible. But my point is that Muhammad, the point is that Muhammad, one of the biggest assertions of Islam is that Muhammad did not even write the Quran, but received it from God himself, and it has to be from the mouth of Muhammad. It has to be from what he wrote down. So, it is a window into deep history. Well, the Mass, any religious celebration for any religion, if you want to get deep into history, go to a synagogue, go to a worship of Vishnu, or go to a Buddhist temple. They're all far older than the Latin Mass. Now, I understand you're Catholic, Kayahan. You're a longtime Friendly Neighborhood historian, former member. Should re-get your membership if you can. But I mean, the truth of the matter is that Catholicism, the Latin Mass, the Catholic Mass is one of the oldest worship services in Christianity, but not one of the oldest in religion, but not the oldest. So I would encourage people to look into all of those. So, Are you able to type it in chat? I'm not able to type it in chat, but it's friendlyneighborhoodhistory@gmail.com. If you want a longer, in-depth, one-on-one conversation with me, you can always email me there. Let me see. They used to drink. Yeah, they did. And thank you so much again, She Is Wise, for the super chat. I thought the church started in Jerusalem and the Church of Rome split from the Orthodox in spite of Orthodox including Jerusalem. I mean, if you look at Christianity geographically from a historical perspective, again, I should basically be asking for super chats at this point, but I'm indulging because it's historical enough, I guess. Christianity is geographically, historically, an Eastern or a Near Eastern religion. It originates obviously in Jerusalem in the 1st century, and it spreads to huge important places like Antioch, Constantinople will later become extremely important, Damascus, and of course Jerusalem, and then it eventually gets into Italy and Europe, and the apostles like St. Paul and St. Peter probably traveled there, or at least is what Christian tradition says. Most of this is written down by a man named Eusebius, 3 centuries after Christ. But the traditional legend says that Peter and Paul are both killed by Nero in Rome. And this is where Peter is placed in Rome, and this is why the Catholic Church believes that Peter is the first pope and the Bishop of Rome and all of that. So that's where the Vatican and all of that comes from. Yeah, Muffle Moose. Never go into one of those places and try to buy alcohol from Muslims. It's not right. Oh, wow. Ricky, thank you for sending the gift memberships. 10 gift memberships. So you just got 10 new members thanks to Ricky's generosity. We really appreciate you, Ricky, and all you do for the channel. It's an English translation. So it's an English translation of the Quran. Yeah, Muhammad was illiterate. And this is a huge sticking point. So the Islamic argument is, if Muhammad was illiterate, how could he have written this himself? He clearly had to have gotten it from somewhere. He might have been illiterate. He might not have been illiterate. He might not have written anything. He might not have received anything. Yeah. A satanic priest can only be if he was first a Catholic priest. Odd. Isn't that interesting? Read and draw your own conclusion. I will try to if I have time. Why are you forbidden to drink alcohol? What's the reason, Amir? I'm just curious. Well, I mean, Catholics forbid their people from eating meat on Fridays, especially during Lent. There are fasts in all religions. All religions require fasting and restriction. It is no different than the halal code, which is a derivative of the kosher laws of the Jews that the Muslims follow. So the Muslims do not drink because they do not want to become intoxicated and dull their senses. They do not want to put anything in their body that could possibly dull their senses to what Allah has for them, which is interesting because they are very good at enhancing their senses, because coffee in the Arabic world is a huge, huge thing. In the Middle Eastern world is a huge thing, and it's really, really cool, actually. So maybe they want the energy to be able to process what Allah has to say to them. Yes, I've heard the idea that he was a parrot. I just don't see any evidence for it. Do you think Obama should become... I already said I'm not answering in this one. What exactly are the hadiths? The hadiths are stories of the life of Muhammad. They contain certain moral guidings and examples of stories and principles of Islamic lore and Islamic morality. I think it's friendlyneighborhoodhistory@gmail.com. The Quran came from Gabriel angel to Muhammad. Yeah, that's the story. Its hadiths are sayings of Muhammad that extrapolate and explain his laws and ideas even more. And yes, please join Harsanet's channel. It's really, really cool. And we've got 10 new members thanks to you. Really, really appreciate it, Ricky. The Shia says Jesus born in Karbala. They got the idea from the Battle of Karbala, the beginning of the new Shia cult. Well, that's inaccurate. Jesus is born in Bethlehem, probably, I guess. I don't know. He's born somewhere in Israel. Tell me about the history of herpes. I'm not going to do that because that's really gross. And this again is a family-friendly channel. But social diseases are throughout all of human history. The Roman Emperor Tiberius had syphilis scarring on his face before he died. Sores from all of his sexual encounters. The Native Americans gave venereal diseases to the Spanish and the English and the French when they settled. For those of you who think that it was just the Europeans giving diseases intentionally to the Indians to kill them off, you are wrong. The Native Americans gave diseases to the Europeans all the time. Let me see. So yeah, I mean, social diseases are just part of human experience. Muslims also marry little kids. I don't know any Muslims who have. The vast majority of them never do. This is based off of one story from Islam that hasn't been historically um, proven that Muhammad married a 6-year-old. I do think that the best evidence that Muhammad exists, though, sometimes is the argument that basically Muhammad is written so much as a villain, so much villainy and shortfalls, so many shortfalls and shortcomings in Muhammad's life, in the Quran and the Hadiths, that why would you make up somebody? Why would you invent your religious leader and make him someone who was just totally immoral and evil? It doesn't make any sense. It's actually better that you make him morally pure and perfect and like a god. But the accounts of Muhammad's life in the Quran and in the Hadiths don't do that. Muhammad is clearly flawed. So in that way, I think there is substantial evidence to say, okay, this is probably real, authentic writing. I just don't think he wrote it. I don't think he received it. That doesn't mean I'm not a Muslim, by the way. You can be a Muslim and not believe that. There are many, many liberal Christians who don't believe that Jesus is God. There are many liberal Jews who don't believe in the truth of the Torah. Let me see. Jesus was born from a virgin woman, Virgin Mary. Well, the Muslims teach that. It's interesting. The Muslims teach that. The Jews do not. So there's no historical evidence of the miracles of Jesus Christ. Well, I've never said there is. I love the special pleading. I love the whataboutism that I get from people when I say this. I've never said anything about the miracles of Jesus. I've said the Gospels are biographies of Jesus of Nazareth, and they are probably really reliable. I have not said anything about did the miracles happen or not. I have said that Jesus clearly lived, existed, taught, and died in Judea, a Roman province in the 1st century AD, and his followers believed he rose from the dead. What was the most deadly, bubonic or Spanish flu? Oh, bubonic. The bubonic plague comes in different periods throughout human history and has localized epidemics, but the two big outbreaks, the 536 AD one under what's called Justinian's plague, and of course there's also the 1347 Black Plague, which is a derivative of the bubonic plague. Those are far more deadly than the Spanish flu ever was, especially when you consider the populations were much smaller than they were then. They were much more smaller in the ancient world than they were in the modern world. Does Muhammad come from the Ishmael lineage? Well, he's Arab, so he would be, according to Arabic ethnology and the religion of Islam. Let me see. Yeah, Devilface, you'll like my video where I point out that the Virgin Mary is not 16, she's probably 13. Let me see here. I'm just going to start ignoring the religion. What is Odin saying? Stolen intelligence has no conscience, therefore furthest from God as humanly possible. I don't know what you're talking about. There is scientific evidence that the person claimed to be Jesus did exist. There are Roman texts, Jewish texts, and the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is a mystery to me. It's an interesting garment. There is plenty of evidence to suggest that it comes from the Middle Ages, but there's also some evidence to suggest that it comes from the 1st century. Even if it came from the 1st century, how do we know that's Jesus? The books documenting Jesus of the Bible are absolutely not reliable. You know that. Well, I'm not basing it off of the Gospels. I'm basing it off of outside sources that confirm what the Gospels say and what the New Testament says. And I'm also looking at the standard of the way the New Testament is written, the way you have miracles and all sorts of incredible occurrences. Well, you have it in every historical source. You also have the fact that they're writing, and there's documentable proof of their writing 60, 70 years after he died, which is absurdly soon compared to any other ancient historical text. The textual evidence is far more cohesively reliable. And I'm sorry, this is not religious spin. This is absolutely documentable truth. So yeah. Let me see here. Not one American has ever cared or learned anything from Jesus' birth, nor for a Jim was. Odin, what are you saying? You're just saying random stuff. It doesn't make any sense. To change the subject from religion, could you explain Black Wall Street? I genuinely don't know anything about it. Are you referring to African Americans in the Great Migration setting up their own economic markets? I don't know a huge amount about it. There was a lot of cultural, economic, and social movement of African Americans in the United States in the 1910s and 20s, especially as they migrated to northern cities where they would face less racism and more economic opportunities. What country in Europe executed the most witches? It's either France or Germany. No, it does not prove Jesus was the Son of God, but it proves that man did exist. Yeah, there's a difference between the two of us. I've never claimed that Jesus is the Son of God. I'm a historian. My job isn't to talk about these things. For me, it's a categorical error to make a judgment on that. That's a personal thing that people decide. I don't make theological claims. I make historical ones. Well, nothing comment. The preponderance of evidence from historians outside of the Christian sphere that say that Jesus didn't exist, is, contradictory to everything you're saying. And they were writing soon after he was alive, when people who would have been able to say he did not live could have spoken up, but they didn't. So, you speak for Jesus, God, and Satan. Well, I speak for myself. Odin, you're either drunk, delusional, or an 11-year-old in your mom's basement. So you know what? You can think about that over the next 30 minutes or so. 100 years after is not soon. Not in our perspective, but in the ancient world, that's extremely soon. And if you consider the fact that the earliest documentation of the existence of Jesus, considering the fact that he was a first-century backwoods rabbi from Judea in the middle of the Roman Empire, is extremely convincing. Hello, Raj. Great to see you. Yes, well, you can keep repeating yourself, but you don't have anything to actually disprove what I've said. Compare any historical writing or any writing of that period, before or slightly after, and the documentable copies and existence of a textual tradition, and the existence, the historical claims made there, they're not witnessed until hundreds of years later. The earliest writings of Plato are hundreds of years after Plato died. So, I'm sorry, but people could not have made that up 100 years after. Most people believe the earliest writings of the New Testament come around in the 50s AD or the 60s AD. And even if you're not a Christian, you have to admit that's not 100 years after, that's 20 years after. So even if they made this man, Jesus of Nazareth up, they made him up very soon afterwards. So, you need to bring the proof. You are the one making the stupid claim. Look at Tacitus. Look at Josephus. Look at Pliny the Elder. Look at Suetonius. All of these men have no interest whatsoever in worshiping Jesus of Nazareth as their God, and yet they are talking about him, his beliefs, his teachings, and his followers within 100 years after his death. I'm sorry, but the historical evidence, the Jews assert the historical evidence. The Muslims, every single religion asserts the historical record. There's also, of course, plenty of archaeological evidence to suggest that, well, not every single part of the story is true, that there is a Pontius Pilate, there are figures like that. The story, even if you don't believe the theological aspects of it, did seem to happen in some sort of historical manner, similar to what the Gospels said. We know Muhammad exists for sure, and Muhammad confirms Jesus existed. Well, I don't know that Muhammad existed for sure. I really don't. I think there is some evidence to say Muhammad existed for sure, and I think what I said earlier is a really good indicator that Muhammad did exist. The way I know that Muhammad did exist is because because if you wanted to make up the leader of your religion, why make him so flawed and immoral and make him a difficult argument? Because one of the objections to Islam to this day is the immoral actions of Muhammad, whether it be a warlord or a man who married a 6-year-old, or the man who said if you die because your aorta is punctured, you are a false prophet, or sorry, your aorta bursts, you are a false prophet, and then dies of a bursted aorta. That doesn't make any sense. So, he knows what I'm talking about. Well, I don't know what you're talking about. Interestingly enough, also from the Mesopotamian flood period, there are older writings of stories of saviors born to virgin mothers performing miracles and even being crucified. Crucifixion is perfected by the Romans and invented by the Syrians. No. There are parallel stories in ancient accounts of these figures existing. I'm not talking about Jesus as a religious figure. I'm talking about him as a historical figure. It is almost impossible to be historically honest and deny any sort of physical existence of Jesus Christ. I think at that point, your skepticism is more important than historical fact. But yes, and I didn't talk about Jesus being a savior. I talked about him existing. So you can. So I never claimed that he was virgin born. I never claimed he was born on December 25th. I never claimed that he. I mean, dying on the cross. That one's pretty obvious. I never claimed any of that stuff. So. And I haven't used the New Testament at all, by the way, to back that up. So this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. We welcome you. Usually we're talking about history, but people wanted to talk about religion, and I guess the history of religion was what we were talking about today. Just look, Christians thinking they invented morality when the Hammurabi had laws and older laws most likely existed. Okay, so I find this to be so bigoted. Muslims don't claim to have invented morality, neither do Christians, neither do Jews even. Morality seems to be something, from a historical perspective, that all human beings have some sort of general consensus on, an idea, no matter where they are. It's one of those things, just like Anunnaki, just like star people, just like temples and pyramids and ziggurats, that just seems to be commonly seen in every civilization throughout all of human history, except they are far more prevalent, far more deep, and far more long-lasting than any of those things. We don't build ziggurats anymore, but we still think murder is usually wrong. Same thing for the Mesopotamians. Let me see here. So this is an interesting channel today, by the way. We usually get the anti-Semites, but it's been mythicists who believe that Jesus didn't exist mixed with Muslims. So whoever you are, we're glad that you're here. You think all of Europe would be Catholic without Martin Luther? Most of it, probably. Will USA be considered an empire 1,000 years from now? It's considered an empire now. It's just hegemonic empire. We just have to redefine the term to include hegemonic control rather than just complete land control. They are all denied by any credible Egyptologist. Come on, Fry and Dawkins' talking points to stem from Alexander Bishop's nonsensical take of two Babylons. That's true. Horus and Jesus are not the same. I'm sorry, they aren't. The people that wrote his story did claim all that stuff. Well, I'm saying the people that wrote his story claimed that Jesus died on the cross, but they also claim he rose again from the dead. Tacitus says he died, but he doesn't say he rose again. Because obviously, if he said that, then Jesus would be God, and Tacitus would be a Christian. Tacitus is not a Christian. The people who wrote about the Christians were hostile to them. You have so many different angles here, and this is because historical ignorance is so bad. I'm just going to take one quick minute to explain this. One, you have clear evidence outside from hostile sources of his existence. Two, you have a manuscript record of the writings about him with much more testimony and consistency than any other ancient text, and much closer to the original source of the story. The date of writing is closer to the date of the story than almost any other ancient text. And you also have the fact that you are dealing with a first century rabbi in the backwoods of the Roman Empire who has almost as much attestable information about his existence as many of the Roman emperors themselves. Now, people who say, "Oh, Jesus is the most documented person in all of history," that's nonsensical. That's stupid. The Roman Emperor Julius Caesar is more attested to. Alexander, probably more attested to. Muhammad, eh. So, my point being that the evidence, there is discernibly strong evidence that Jesus of Nazareth existed, and all the arguments, all the circumstantial evidence points to it, and all the evidence, hard evidence points to it, and all the logic points to it too. So, why the Jews hate Jesus while he was a Jew? Why do Christians hate Jews because even though their Messiah and God is a Jew? I have no idea. But, I mean, of course, the rejection of Jesus' message is by Jewish leadership, which then insists on Pontius Pilate killing him according to the story. Again, I said according to the story. I didn't say every single part of it is true. I said according to the story. And there is a divide between Jews and Christians. The earliest Christians seem to be very comfortable with worshiping at the temple as a sect of Judaism that believed that Jesus was their Messiah. But by the destruction of the temple by Titus in the Jewish revolt of 66 to 70 AD, in which the Flavians were able to use that to usurp the Roman Empire and take control of it under Vespasian and Titus. Yes, all historical, by the way. If you're worried that I'm not talking about enough history and it's been too religious, there's a lot of history that I just gave you right there. Yeah, the truth of the matter is, at that point, there's a division that grows ever the more so. per, pertinent between Christians and Jews. Paul was the earliest writer about Jesus, and his writing showed he was not local and he was unfamiliar with Jewish laws and customs. How could he be a witness and get such things wrong? I never said Paul was a witness. I said St. Paul is the earliest writer, and he's writing about 20 years after Jesus dies, documenting his life and stories, which is very uncommon. And the earliest manuscript evidence, the manuscripts that actually exist that were copied down from Paul and from the earliest apostles, come from the 2nd century, which is only, again, about 100 years after Jesus died. Do you think Russia and Europe will make white people distinct? And Europe war will make white people distinct? No. Let me see here. Where is my moderator? Can we get some of the crisis and nonsense out of the chat, please? We have inscriptions dated from 25 to 780 with inscriptions of Pontius Pilate in stone and Mosaic churches coming in the mid-200s. They have been unearthed. It's true. Earliest Christian art and evidence comes. I mean, even Eusebius, who is not considered to be a paramount historical writer, is writing about the earliest events of the Christian church in the 4th century after Constantine legalizes the church. And everybody is skeptical of that. But he's still writing only 3 centuries after Jesus dies. And that's still and that's, again, common for ancient writings to take centuries to actually percolate. Where the earliest manuscripts are centuries later, or the earliest writings are centuries later. Even most Islamic sources are dated by the most conservative of Islamic scholars, who are totally Muslim themselves, to be written centuries later. Yeah. I just love this. The idea that I am defending all of religion, just because I said Jesus of Nazareth exists, shows more of a bias against religion than it does towards learning the truth. There's way more evidence for Alexander the Great than Jesus. The question isn't whether any exists, it's simply friendly history. Compare them. Okay, Alexander the Great is a giant, massive, imperial, historical figure who conquers almost all of the known world at the time. You bet somebody's going to be writing and drawing and talking about him. He Hellenized all of the Middle East and the Near East. He took over Egypt. He replaced Egypt with he replaced the Egyptians with the Greeks as the most powerful force in the antiquity, the most consequential force in antiquity. The Persians were also there, but they were gone too. Gaugamela, for instance. Again, more history for you if you just want to focus on the history. However, that legacy and impact in his lifetime is significantly different than a 1st century Jewish carpenter rabbi who believed he was the Messiah. Yeah. Let me see. Why did they kill Jesus? Jesus was killed because he claimed to be God. And that's what the Gospels seem to say. Can someone be on the wrong side of history? I don't think history has a side. I really don't. I think history just is. We have Indian sources about Alexander and can't get a cousin to speak for Jesus. Stop it. A cousin. Except that the New Testament writers, several of them claim to be relatives of Jesus, and those writings come from the 1st century. St. James, for instance, the Epistle of James, St. Jude's writing. These are all 1st century writings, most likely, that are supposedly cousins of Jesus who write. You just don't accept it because you don't believe in the Christian message, which is fine. It's not about believing in a message. It's about historical testimony. Yeah. History supports there are many people called Jesus in Mexico. Jesus there neither considered divine nor did miracles. Well, that's Jesus. They're naming him in honor. Which goes back to my whole point about impact. Was Jesus one of the biggest socialists? That's a good question. Was Jesus a socialist? No. Not in the sense of redistribution of land. In the sense of if you think socialism is sharing and giving to people, then yeah, Jesus was totally a socialist. I'm totally a socialist at that point. Then why didn't they write about Jesus? We know they weren't any of the gospel writers because the gospels contradict each other on descriptions of crucifixion and events after. I love how you're asking a historian to go into biblical talks about all of this when my whole point is to say, I'm not saying that every single thing in the gospels is true. I can't say that as a historian and retain my credibility. But I can say as a historian, there is really good evidence to suggest that Jesus has a lot of attestation to his existence from Christian and non-Christian sources that wrote very close to his life and proportionally, considering that he was a first century rabbi in the backwoods of the Judean province, there is real reason to believe that, hey, there's really, really good evidence for Jesus existing, especially considering his time and place. I haven't seen this many mythicists since 2010. All the nonsense of this slop followers blindly following is mind-blowing. It's just crazy. And I have never said that Jesus is God or Jesus is the Christ, even the Messiah. I have never said any of those things. I've never said the triune God exists. All I've said is Jesus of Nazareth existed. People have a problem with that because they have a problem with Jesus, not because they have a problem with history. If they had they don't have a problem with history. There's nothing problematic historically to say Jesus existed. Jesus is an important prophet in Islam. He's mentioned 25 times in the Quran. Muhammad only 4 times to put it in perspective. But yeah, Jesus, Isa, Rasul, is a prophet. As Emir will tell you, and several other people who are here today. Giving your kids the name Jesus is American Latin is common. I think he was just telling a joke, Alex. Who's the smartest manipulator in history? Ooh, that's a good question. I'm going to go off the top of my head with Themistocles. Lies to the Athenians that the island of Euboea is going to steal all of their resources if they don't build a navy in order to destroy the Persians is a huge lie, but it saves the Greeks. It saves Greek civilization, which means he saves Alexander the Great, the Hellenization of the Near East, and all of the history that goes from that. You understand Christianity began as a cult, right? Pulled in Mithratic practices, etc., except it didn't. Christianity is a offshoot of Judaism, but believed they had found their Messiah in Jesus of Nazareth. All of the apostles were Jews. They worshipped at the Jewish temple. So a man performs about 2 miracles a month, which is low if you ask me, but he doesn't convince any backwater follower villager enough to speak as witnesses. We can stop pretending he's equal to Caesar. I didn't say that the attestation of evidence is equal to Caesar. I'm saying proportionally it's closer than you think. It's not even at all, but proportionally considering one person versus these other people, it's closer than you think. And yes, Jesus supposedly performs miracles. I'm saying that's what was written about him. I'm not saying that's what happened. And the witnesses, 2 of them, were supposedly his apostles, Matthew and John. Are you Christian? Well, George Bush, I don't blame you for asking. I get tired of answering this question. I don't share my religious views with anyone on this channel. My religious and political perspectives remain my own. My job is to talk about history and social studies in a friendly, neighborly manner. I got my historical background in my studio. I've got my retro mic, all of this stuff. My job is to talk about history in a friendly, neighborly, but respectful and honest manner. And I don't think you can be dishonest and say Jesus didn't exist. I think it's historically dishonest. Hello, Faraz. Let me see. See, I get mad at people like Clarence. No offense, Clarence, but you just yell out Jesus Christ is Lord. I mean, that has nothing to do with what we're learning about. At least people who are like no comment and Devilface are actually adding things to the conversation. It's ignorant, but it's interesting. I'm not inherently anti-Christianity, just genuinely interested in a Christian historian's take on it. I'm a historian. I'm giving you a historian's take. There, you got your historian's take. Maybe, was it Roach who gave the super chat? I don't know if he's a Christian. He can give you his perspective. Harsonet's a Christian. Maybe he can give you his perspective. I mean, Gaiahan's Catholic. We've got plenty of Christians here in the chat who know about history, are friendly neighborhood historians, meaning they've liked and subscribed, or have become members even, and learned a lot about history from me, learned a lot about religious history from me, who are more than willing to talk to you about this. Why the Muslims don't migrate to other Muslim countries like the Arabian Peninsula, to other rich Muslim countries? Because a lot of the Muslim countries in those areas wouldn't want them there and would not be rich for long if they got there. But also, the United States and the Europeans destabilized this area through neoconservative and neoliberal projects like the Arab Spring and the war in Iraq. So therefore, they think that the Europeans and the Americans owe them something. And it's an understandable reason. Remember, whenever you want to complain about mass migration in the West, as a lot of people on the internet seem to want to do without really understanding how it works, it was the West that destabilized these areas in the first place. Yeah. I'm less knowledgeable on Muhammad, but I would hold him to the same standard as any other warlord claiming to be a religious player. Prove it. Well, how about a religious... Well, again, these are big claims, but Muhammad claimed to... You aren't criticizing Muhammad the way you're criticizing Jesus, but Muhammad's existence is, I think, in doubt in some ways. Muhammad married a 6-year-old, consummated when he was 9. claim an illiterate warlord merchant speaks for God, receives it from, and he writes it down perfectly. It's absurdity to me. I mean, at least that part of it. So, who cares if a guy named Jesus existed that didn't do miracles, wasn't divine, didn't teach anything new? Now the Messiah will be mad. Why did we get to, now we've gotten to the Israel stuff. Who is the man in history of two horns, the two-horned man? I don't know. For the answer of how they do, specifically in UAE and Turkey, lots of immigrants from other Muslim countries, pretty sure in Qatar and Kuwait as well. I'm not surprised. Roach, another super chat. For anyone actually interested in the myths regarding mythicism and the pagan origin stories, I suggest R.L. Solberg or Inspiring Philosophy. Yes, I've watched some of Inspiring Philosophy stuff. Please check them out after you check out all of my stuff, including, if Hars is still here, you can put the video, my early history of Islam video. Since I've talked about it enough, you can learn about it. Or my history of Easter video, which talks about Christianity. You think Leonardo da Vinci had ADHD? He would have had to be such a polymath. Let me see here. I can accept the answer. I know plenty of historians who don't believe Jesus existed. The vast majority of them believe he did. And they're not in the vast majority of secular historians believe that he did. Tom Holland is a great example of this. It sounds absurd until you read the Quran. You can't learn Islam from a non-Muslim. That's an argument from authority, but okay. How did Christianity transform from a small Jewish sect in the 1st century into the official religion of the Roman Empire? That's a good historical question, solve any game. This is where people think conspiratorially that Christianity seized power in 325 in the 4th century, that Constantine just became a lapdog for the Christians and did whatever they want. That part is partially true. Watch my video about Constantine to learn more. My entire series on the Roman Empire and Roman emperors is available to you both in long and short form content for you guys anytime you want to watch it. Christianity is heavily persecuted within the Roman Empire, but the 2nd century, or the 200s, the 3rd century, is full of a period of chaos and destabilization of the empire, barbarian raids, secessions, different generals, civil wars, corruption, called the crisis of the 3rd century. Christians are still heavily persecuted during this time, although it is sporadic. Eventually, the Christians, because they are generally poor, which is always the case in almost any sociological context in any area of the world, outbreed the more wealthy, organized Romans. And eventually you have a growing number of Christians who are not a majority, but are a plurality in the Roman Empire over and against the pagans. Constantine probably read the tea leaves, and realized what he needed to do. But also he has his supposed experience at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. He wins the battle. It's not about that he sees the first 2 letters of Jesus' name in Greek on a shield and says, "In this sign ye shall conquer." Who knows if that happened? There's no evidence for it. It's highly dubious. But he wins, and he credits the Christians with his victory, so he legalizes Christianity. And in legalizing Christianity, you have the ability for Christianity to blossom. He doesn't make it the official religion. A man named Theodosius will do that later, to the detriment and persecution of all pagans and any other peoples. But the Christians, after 313, when Christianity was legalized with the Edict of Milan, and particularly at the Council of Nicaea 12 years later, are able to assert their influence on the Roman emperor over the entire empire. Constantine's mother searches for the Christian relics, like the cross and the tomb of Jesus in the Holy Land. So the Roman Empire becomes Christian kind of by coincidence, but over time, the depopulation of pagan Rome with Christian Rome. So Sam Shamoon cannot teach Islam. What a flawed argument. Yeah, you can't teach it because you don't know it. That's initiation fallacy. That's an argument from authority. That's what it is. What do you think of this idea that Islam invaders ruined Persia for good? I don't know if Persia's ruined for good. I wouldn't say that the Muslims necessarily ruined everything about it. Look at the Safavids and how fascinating they are. The history of Muhammad has always been a tough one to prove. For some reason, they chose to protect the image of Muhammad by slaughtering anyone who drew him so. Exactly. Solve, I appreciate the question. It's a great question. Can you talk about world orders throughout history? Like once world was bipolar and the U.S. became sole superpower. What was the original world order? You would say the Greeks, the Romans, but they are localized. They are not intercontinental and they are not global. You don't get global superpowers until the empires of the British and the French. Once you get the New World involved and you get constant contact with Africa and Asia. The Chinese, the Han Dynasty, was extremely powerful, almost as powerful as the Romans in almost every aspect, and they were extremely formidable. But they weren't as large and in charge as the Romans were. So there was no ability for bipolarity, but the Romans and the Han knew about each other and often were ready to work with each other and trade with each other. How is the Bible we know today created? What books, if any, do you think should have been included to bolster its historical credibility? I have no idea. I can't really answer that question from a historical perspective. The Bible is written by the Jews, the first part of it, the Old Testament. There is a debate, long-standing debate of how many books should be included in the Old Testament canon, or what's called the Hebrew Bible. It's compiled most likely when the Jews are in exile after the first temple is destroyed by the Babylonians. And it develops over time. This is what we call Second Temple Judaism and the rabbinic school of thought. And so, yeah. For anyone who says rabbinic Judaism is not ancient Judaism, Jesus was called a rabbi. Most of the people who deny this are Catholics, so I just have to bring that up again. Jesus was literally called rabbi in the Gospels. So, then there's the New Testament, which is written in a similar pattern where you have different writings for different contexts with different stories in them, and letters and encouragements by Christians to their different audiences who basically say this is what you should do and this is how you should live. And over time, the community of faith basically says this is what we're going to use. The Jews had done that before. They had created a Greek translation in the Hellenized world of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. The Christians would do this in their own, and their version would be into Latin. Obviously, the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire and the dominance of Roman Christianity, led by the Pope, led to the development of what we call the Catholic Church today. So there was a need to create a book to read in the Roman world that was in Latin, and that's where the Vulgate translation by Jerome comes from. That was the standard King James version of the Bible for 1,000 years in church history. So there you go. But before then, you have a pretty solid consensus on these books here are what we use, and these books are not. I'm glad you love history, Pokey. That's my sign-off, to love history. How did the fall of the Byzantine Empire affect LeBron's legacy? It did not. When does the word Catholic come into use? 2nd century, maybe later. I believe the Crusades were justified and a net positive to the world. I also believe a majority of inquisitions by Rome are also. If you can agree with the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you should agree with that. I don't know about the Inquisition. I think the Inquisition was a bad chapter. The Crusades are very complex, and it's very, very stupid and simplistic to say Crusades bad or Crusades good. I think the Crusades were an effort to undermine what Islam had wrought by conquering Christian lands. I don't like this channel. It should be avoided. Avoid history literally says that. But you've got the Lego Star Wars emoji, so good for you. Yes, and I know what that is. The Greeks and Romans went to Egypt to learn math. That's true. The Book of Bartholomew is hilarious. Well, there's the Commodity, there's the Gnostics, which is not considered mainstream Christianity, which has this long-standing debate about what will be mainstream Christianity during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Do you want to smoke weed? After today, I could use anything to lighten up. One of my favorite countries of all time is Afghanistan. It's a really beautiful country, and it's like a sister to Iran. What do you think of Afghanistan? I wrote my master's thesis about the great game in Afghanistan. I love the Afghan people. I love Afghan food. I love Afghan culture. I think almost very few people understand what Afghanistan actually is. Afghanistan is a series of tribes that have competed and pushed and shoved and wrestled in order to create something of stability, and they are just as strong and tenacious as the mountains and desert that define their land. That is why Afghanistan is so hard to conquer. It is a crossroads. It's the graveyard of empires. It's the height of the Silk Road. Alexander and his followers could not hold it. The Romans never got there. The British could not do it. The Russians and the Soviets could not do it. And the Americans sure as heck couldn't do it. You have Masoretic text and Hellenic text, which differ in Judaism, and Talmudic Judaism is completely different as well. Those are different, like the Septuagint and the Hebrew Bible, I guess. They're different languages, so yeah. There is a metal band named Orphaned Land that is theme is friendship between the 3 Abrahamic religions, and they finally bring peace. We'll see it. Well, hopefully their music is good. Rabbinic Judaism is an evolution out of the Pharisee school of thought. There are many differences between rabbis in Jesus' day and rabbis in later Judaism. Oh, absolutely. Religions change and develop all the time. Avoid history. That's for sure. And I said give super chats on religion, and I've made $30, so I'm happy tonight. But the truth of the matter is, this stuff is close enough to history that I don't mind talking about it without a super chat. But what I am saying is that the tradition of rabbinic schools of thought, tradition of learning the Torah and applying it in different contexts. The Torah being the first 5 books of the Bible, the first 5 books supposedly written by Moses that contain God's law, was something that, and committing it to memory and living that out in what the closest form today would be Orthodox Judaism, that those ideas existed before the Second Temple was built, and certainly after the Second Temple was built, centuries before Jesus. How has bread and circus affected world today's society? Being able to sate people with all the different forms of entertainment, and being able to put screens in front of people so that they don't learn, but they actually just absorb content rather than actually learning it and learning how to learn it has been kind of our bread and circuses today. The bread and circuses, by the way, was the government funded entertainment and welfare food dole that was given out to the Romans during different times in different cities, particularly Rome itself, so that they wouldn't revolt. And it's a way of sating your population with entertainment and welfare and food. You look like a Jehovah's Witness just thinking out loud. I don't think a Jehovah's Witnesses can't have social media. Is it accurate to say that original world order was no global superpower and instead each region had its own superpower? Yes. And second world order started by American continent being discovered? You could say that, yeah. What do you think? Oh, Biznatch, great to see you. Of the Pashtun people being the lost tribe after the Israelites got conquered by Persia? No. The Pashtun? No. Afghanistan was a Buddhist country? Yes. True. Converted to Islam. I am curious to know your opinion of the idea of a Kurdish state being created. If a nation state can be created and hold on, then it can be created. And the Kurds probably deserve one. They've been kind of disenfranchised for a long time. When did the term Catholic started? Weren't all Christians before Luther? No, definitively not. In 1054, the Western Roman Catholic Church, as we call it, splits from the Eastern Orthodox Church. They both claim to be founded directly by Jesus, so they claimed the other one was a heretic. They've since kind of gotten rid of their differences. This was amplified in the Fourth Crusade of 1204, where the Crusaders declared the Byzantine Christians, who were Orthodox Christians, to be heretics because they were Catholics, and they sacked Constantinople and conquered it for a short period of time. It's called the Latin Empire. Some history you don't know about that's really, really cool. There's lots of history on this channel that you probably don't know about that I discuss all the time. So anyways, my point being that there was a divide. So you already had Christians who were not Catholic. You had divides before then in certain parts of the Middle East in Christianity. And you certainly have Christians with differing ideas from the earliest days of the church. And you have proto-Protestants like John Wycliffe, who tries to translate the Bible into English, and his followers, the Lollards. You also have Jan Hus and I forget the name, the Moravians, I think they were called. They were not Protestants, but they were not Catholics either, but they claimed to be Christians. Herb and home-grown rustica sacred tobacco in a big burly tobacco leaf is known as a good way to feel earth. Well, I love my smoking jacket because British officers brought home Turkish tobacco and had to use something to keep themselves clean, so they wore smoking jackets so they could smoke their tobacco and not get it on their street clothes. I enjoy a good pipe. Do you find Norse paganism fascinating? Yes, but I don't find it to be true for us, so stop trying to reconvert the West to it. Orthodox study Bible, we just meddle more with the Old Testament than other Christians. Did you know that Hinduism and Zoroastrianism are from the same origin? No, they are not. How did the Catholic monarchs use Christianity? I mean, unless you're saying the Indo-Aryans start Ahura Mazda. No, Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda is the prophet. Ahura Mazda and Zoroaster is the god. Ahura Mazda did not take his inspiration from the Hindus. Unless you're saying that they are Indo-Aryan inspired religions, which would make sense because the ancient Persians are Aryans, just like the ancient Indians are, especially the Indo-Aryans. Nordic paganism gives us most of the weekday names. That's true. But I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. Or am I? I don't know. I don't share my religious perspectives, so stop guessing. To the guy who cussed at me, I didn't say they weren't Jews, but Rabbinic Judaism was largely an evolution from one of the previous schools of thought. You are correct. For someone who avoids history, you sure know a lot about it. It's sad nobody remembers the great knight Henry of Scout. What was that? I don't know. Can you think of a non-Western country with strong historical ties to the Western world? Persia would be a good example. Define fascism. Fascism is I hate doing this because you always ask me to do it, and I've done it more than enough, and I'm already at 90 minutes. I only wanted to go an hour, but you guys had such great questions. I'm trying to catch up to the chat so I can end this. Fascism is is a nationalist belief, is an ultra-nationalist belief that believes by using military apparatuses and the different cultural norms of a particular society, you can create an authoritarian form of government that represses the rights of the people, but embraces an ultra-nationalist model and image of the future of that nation. It is militaristic, it is anti-democratic, it is anti-communist, although it was formed by socialists, and it has a command-planned economy just like socialist countries do. And it comes from the Roman idea of the fascia, which was an axe with a bundle of sticks underneath it, where if it was tied together, it would be a lot stronger. So yeah. How was the Lutheran Church established? What made it different from the Catholic Church? Didn't Luther really nail names of people who had brought their way into Catholic heaven? About their way. No, he nailed the 95 Theses, which were objections to Catholic teachings on indulgences at the time. He was still pretty much Catholic, but he later evolved an idea that the Bible alone would be the authority and that Christians did not need to do good works to be saved, but that good works help their salvation somehow or something like that. So he basically didn't believe in the Pope or Mary and some of these doctrines and became a Protestant, and that's where the Lutheran Church comes from. And thank you again for the gift of 10 memberships, Ricky. We really appreciate it. You are such a great person and a wonderful help to this channel. What is your opinion on the Essene sect? Well, they were... it's the Qumran community. These are people who supposedly wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were a derivative of the Second Temple Jewish period who basically had no love for the temple and for the bureaucratic organization of religious Judaism at the time. Ahura Mazda is the god. Zoroaster is the prophet. Okay, so thank you. Thank you, Scourge. The Catholic claims the Pope has authority. Yeah, we know about it. I'm tired of talking about religion. I really, really am. Have you ever thought that if new members come to this channel and see your profile picture and don't realize it's a joke? Yeah, but I don't care. My profile picture is a joke because one of my I get this constant accusation that I'm working for AIPAC because I'm trying to talk about history and people want to talk about Israel. And so people think that I'm being paid by AIPAC. So one of my moderators, Hars, who you met earlier, who has the pinned chat in the chat, made this AIPAC tracker where you can as a meme, as a joke about me. But I am not paid by AIPAC. I do not get anything. Yeah, give me a super chat. For goodness sake. Clement of Rome was making a decision for the church in Corinth in the 1st century while John was still alive. He was the bishop of Rome. Okay, then. I'm not talking about this anymore. I've already talked about it to death. Do you know anything about Han Capon? You mean Hugh Capet, the founder of the Capet dynasty? Do you know that the claim... You all are members now. There. Whatever. Did you know the claims of historians like Josephus and Tacitus made about armies appearing in the skies over the Jewish Roman war and claims that it was a second coming? Any more to it? Yeah, there's some Christians who believe that's the basis for when Jesus says in the Gospels that this generation will not pass away until you see all of these things fulfilled. They think that some Christians believe that happened with the destruction of the temple and the conquering of Judea by the Romans during the Jewish revolt. Well, before Prophet Zoroaster remade Persian paganism to a monotheistic religion. Persians were pagan, and since Persia and India had the same origins, so Indian paganism and Persian paganism evolved from. Yeah, but Indian paganism evolves into Hinduism. They are very different religions. And more memberships is great for the channel. We really appreciate having our new members like Alison, Pure Love, Nerfer, Sir Studmuffin. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. And Roach, you get to be members. You get early access, you get your own emoji, and you get your own videos that nobody else has. So, anyways, I don't know, Johnny. I think you're just being weird. He's paid by Ice Spice. I shake some for stream. No, Bear, you shake some for stream. I've done enough today. Roman von Stromberg is one of the most interesting historical figures to me. Very eccentric sociopath. Sounds like the name sounds very eccentric. It sounds like Emperor Norton, but I don't know about him. What's your favorite part of history? I love European history, particularly modern in the last couple of centuries. If there's a place I would want to live, it's Paris in the late 19th century, but I love Russian history, in particular 19th and 20th century. What is your opinion on Grant's presidency? A lot of potential. Started off well. Corruption really did him in. It's not even his fault. Bruh, you don't know Czech history. I'm sorry, I don't know everything. It just sounds like a troll, but Czech names are hard to pronounce. I know about Václav Havel and the Velvet Revolution. It's called the Velvet Revolution because it's led by people from artistic backgrounds that influence the overthrow of the communist government there. Well, still Germanic people have ancestors who were Norse pagans, and everyone should respect their ancestors, why their history and their culture should be so demonized. I never said it should be demonized. I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily need to be followed. I'd love to live in the 1700s, but I love modern plumbing. Fair point. He's that European noble warlord who fought the Bolsheviks in Chinese and Mongolia and tried to revive the Mongol Empire. Ah. probably didn't go far with that. How do you feel about Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus? Okay, so this is where Steve will see this and then make a big diatribe about what habeas corpus is and write a definition like I'm stupid and I don't know what it is. I think it's a failing. I think it was a bad moment in Lincoln's presidency when he did it, but I don't think that I don't think it hurts the overall message and theme that Lincoln's presidency is overwhelmingly successful in just what America needed and that he is the best president. I think he was flawed. I think he was a human. Did Europeans I also think that during war presidents do things that they normally wouldn't do, so I can understand it much more than if he did it in peacetime. Did Europeans rewrite history during the Dark Ages? No, they preserved ancient histories and may have embellished them, maybe just a little bit. Did nationalism create modern states or did states create nationalism? Great question. You look at it, nationalism as an idea is formed in the creation of modern states. I would say that nationalism creates the modern states. Look at Greece, look at Germany, look at Italy in the 19th century. Look at the rebellions in the 19th century. A longing to be your own people, to have a nation and a state that is your own, basing it off of a piece of Westphalia that ended the 30 Years' War in 1648. These European and Latin American and Balkan countries and later African countries invoke these ideas and these principles of the pre-Enlightenment and the Enlightenment to say we have a right to determine our own future and our own fates, and the people of this ethnic group that live in this country should have the ability to form their own nation with their own government out of that, and that's how you get a nation state. And I think that really is the essence of nationalism, patriotism and a desire to be run by the people of your own nation. Salem witch trials. I'm running out of steam and energy, and I've been going almost 100 minutes. But Goblin Slayers, since you ask, and I think you're new, I'll be happy to answer. The Salem witch trials are persecutions carried over by the Europeans. These traditions are of persecution, influence the American settlers, and they kill off 22 people in Salem in 1692, which is a fraction of what was killed off in England, which was a fraction of what was killed off in Germany during this time. The 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries see huge, huge persecutions of witches all throughout medieval Europe. In early modern Europe, they affected Catholic and Protestant alike. The idea was it's better to kill them off than they threaten your eternal soul, because your eternal soul is eternal and your human body, it lives for about 70 to 80 years. And back then it was much less because of nutrition and things like that. Basically, a slave named Tituba was supposedly indicted for, I think she was an Indian woman, for caught being a satanic witch who caused demonic seizures by some of the young girls in Salem. These girls were probably victims of epilepsy, and it eventually became a witch hunt, literally, where you would blame someone for something and you could seize their land and goods or gain status in the community or get attention away from yourself by saying someone else was a witch or something like that. So there's a quick stuff about the Salem witch trials. Eventually, the governor of Massachusetts steps in and stops it. What would have happened if Britain joined the Civil War? I don't know, but I think the Union still wins. But they were close, especially after the, what was it called? Trent Affair? Like, everyone finds every other religion fascinating, but no, not Norse paganism. And also why everyone is okay with the fact that there was a cultural genocide against them. There wasn't a cultural genocide against them. I really hate the misuse and the overuse of the term genocide for any reason. Norse paganism is fascinating. People love learning about. Look at Marvel. Look at what Marvel's been able to do with Thor and Loki. Of course, people find Norse paganism fascinating. It's not a religion. Paganism is not treated as a religion in the same way historically as Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Hinduism. Let me see here. Like, people worship and respect their invaders while learn the lifestyle of their ancestors is evil. Have you ever played Lego video games like Lego Star Wars? Yes, I played the Lego video games. I think Indiana Jones was my favorite one, but okay. Yeah, people worship and respect. Yes, I understand that. There's a need to preserve the ancient, but not everything about that is preservable. And some of it's still inherited. Like I said, Thor and Loki are still things. We still have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I mean, come on. To say that it's just been completely ran over is nonsense. It was ran over in many ways, and the Christians took over. But yeah, it's just odd to me. Slavery was already dying out. Oliver and Wilberforce had such a movement already happening. It would have died out within a few decades organically. And many more millions of people would have been enslaved, and I don't think it would have died out organically. I think the founders and Lincoln were wrong to think that. I also think that after Afghanistan, the country is most similar to Iran as Pakistan. Okay, then. Well, they are allies. Which doesn't mean wise woman. Yes. The last surviving remnant of Slavic paganism was apparently a holy tree or something that was destroyed by the Bolsheviks, who either killed or gulagged the last guy tending to it. Makes sense. Anti-religious people are anti-pagan. Do you see any parallels between Roman history and American history? Because many people say that history has repeated. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes a lot, as Mark Twain would say. Yes, there is some parallels to it. The Americans build their republican system of government. The idea of an executive who functions in a temporary role and leads the military is based on the Roman consul. The Senate, I mean, this is all being the older, mature chamber compared to the Assembly or the House of Representatives. Yes, the structures of American government are neoclassical, Roman and Greek inspired. Of course they are. That was the popularity of the Enlightenment period. That was the in fashion of the neoclassical artistic era of that time. Is that where the term witch hunt comes from? Yes. Did the Russians lie when they said Hitler was dead? No. And thank you again so much, Ricky, for the memberships. 20 memberships given out today. You guys all get all sorts of extra perks and bonuses and videos of your own. So please consider becoming a member if you haven't already. We can use all the money on this channel that we can get our hands on. And it all goes back into improving the tech and the service of this channel. How long did the Celtic paganism last in Scotland? I don't know a lot about how it was Christianized compared to England. I know a lot more there. But I'd imagine by the 10th century. Did the Russians help Hitler escape Germany? No. Your vocal muscles have to be next level. I've lost my voice just listening. Yeah. Thank you, Roach. I'm about to go. And I put in new Invisaligns trays that help straighten my teeth. And it's killing my tongue, and it's giving me a lisp. My voice isn't normally like this. What history YouTuber is your favorite other than your own? History Matters, Tea Time with Lindsay Holiday, Epimetheus. They all do fantastic stuff. I do not like Crash Course, but some people have learned a lot from Crash Course. What was the Norsemen's main advantage over the Anglo-Saxons? Longboats were fast and quick and easy, and their pillaging and raiding was almost always a surprise. I've never watched Forgotten History. I guess I'll have to. Thank you for the recommendation. I'm going to sign off. I'm exhausted. This has gone a long time. It's been great. I really appreciate all of you. We covered so many different topics. We went 40 minutes longer than we expected to. But you were worth it. And I'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. So that's 9 o'clock in Great Britain for more Friendly Neighborhood History with people from all over the world who come to learn about the history of the world. I hope you have a great night. Take care. Like and subscribe on your way out. Check out all the long and short form content available here. Become a Friendly Neighborhood Historian by liking and subscribing, and become a member to get even more access. And we really would appreciate it, but no pressure whatsoever. Thank you for a really good session, everybody. And I will see you tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern. Have a great night. Use the history that you learned to impress your future wife or husband at the club, or to win the trivia night at your local brewery. And tell them that you learned it from me, Friendly Neighborhood History. Take care. Have a great night, and as always, love history. Bye bye now.